I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, the 2024 presidential election is about to go into high gear, full throttle, as a matter of fact. You know the names, you know the players. They come out every election season. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, maybe Gavin Newsom from California. You know the usual suspects. But what about a fresh face on the political scene? That's where Daryl Constantine comes in. I'm delighted to have him here as a guest on Spotlight. Daryl, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Logan, thank you very much for having me. And I'd like to say hello to your audience, and I appreciate all of their consideration as we go into the 2024 election.
My pleasure. I'm sure it is their pleasure as well. They'd like to hear some fresh ideas. I've been reading through your political manifesto, and it is not a straight line. You're conservative on some items, you're more liberal on other items, and it's kind of making a moderate candidate out of you, which I think America is craving for right now. Tell me a little bit about what you stand for as you hope to land in the White House in January 2025.
Certainly, and I think like a lot of Americans, I think we've become frustrated and disenfranchised with the sort of partisan gridlock that's been dividing our country and becoming increasingly more pronounced and escalating tensions administration by administration. And both sides are very locked into a certain set of ideas, a certain set of goals and objectives. And I think the American people are really looking for somebody that can sort of move past that. And my viewpoint, my political opinion is sort of outside of the traditional model that republicanism has been running off of, which is sort of big government versus small government. I'm really less interested in that than I am with the underpinning spiritual well-being of the nation. And, I think that the size of government that a country needs and benefits from, I don't think that that's necessarily a fixed static principle. And where I would fault republicanism is that they're very fixated on that one issue. And at holding to that as their organizing principle, they've allowed a complete moral inversion of the nation. And I think actually really both wings of the party are ready to move past that. So we have a lot of things going on in the country, and I don't think that it is necessarily a point in time where we can just sort of stop the government. People are hurting. And, people need things like healthcare. People need things like minimum wages to protect them under these times of hyperinflation and all the things going on with the economy. And sort of by sort of working with the left on that side, we can also say, hey, let's talk about some other things culturally that are very concerning. Let's talk about a federal ban on pornography. Let's talk about the runaway culture. And we look obviously at the gun violence and all of these very horrible things that are going on in the country. And we get gridlocked into this conversation about, don't take my guns away, Second Amendment, this or that. Look, I don't think that we necessarily have a country that is healthy enough to where anybody over the age of 18 should be able to walk into a Walmart and purchase a firearm. But I think that it's a two-pronged problem. There's the issue of the instrument and the gun, the weapon is certainly a part of that, but the individual is also a part of that as well. And I think rather than sort of no, yeah, let's have that conversation about gun control, but let's do something bipartisan. Let's talk about cleaning up the culture with that. Let's talk about the meaningful restrictions, but let's also maybe talk about a federal ban on pornography, things that I would hope people from both sides of the aisle would be supportive of. So we have a lot of problems culturally, and we're getting into this conversation now about cancel culture and social media and speech suppression. And it's a little bit of a trick because we've done such a good job of talking about suppressing particular ideas, but at the same time, the standard rhetoric is gone completely unpoliced. So, I'm not just in favor of, hey, anything goes. I don't think that a 12-year-old child should be able to hop on YouTube and watch a music video that's essentially a depiction of an Atlanta strip club. That to me, so we're not policing that stuff. And part of the problem is when conservatism backs away from actually talking and standing up on the cultural front and retreating further and further into, hey, we don't care about anything, we get in a very disoriented place as a nation, because there is a need to set a cultural tempo. And what we have seen over the past 20 or 30 years is by sort of the Republican Party backing away from that responsibility, we have allowed something very disordered to take that place and to actually set the tempo culturally. And I think it's a bit of a misnomer to think that you can sort of have a sort of anything goes laissez-faire approach. Any society is going to set a cultural tempo, and that is what we are seeing right now. We have a new cultural tempo that has been set in place, and it's very antithetical to not only what the United States is built on, but really all of Western civilization.
I think so much of it is media driven. Everything you say today makes tremendous sense. I would poll Americans, and I guarantee you 65%, maybe even 70% of Americans would agree with everything you just said. But if you put that before the mainstream media, they will often attack it as ultra conservative, ultra extremist, ultra MAGA even, where, we are a Christian country. We do have a set of values that we all, or most of us, ascribe to. They're universal values that can be accepted by any religion. Yet the mainstream media seems to, put its thumb to its nose to any talk of having some morals, having some decency, and having some character in the United States of America.
Yeah, it's absolutely correct, and it's very concerning. And to me, really, if there's one issue that I want to hammer home to the American people, it's the sexualization of our children. And, before we go into the Trump scenario, the election, and all of this sort of conspiratorial stuff, I don't want us to lose track of what is a very clear conspiracy that is clearly evident, which is you can go to a Target and a Walmart and you can walk into the children's literature sections and you will see that they are selling books to be read to 2- and 3-year-old children that is promoting homosexuality. And that to me very clearly crosses the line of what is tolerance and what we understand as being a tolerant nation to now we are actually actively pushing that lifestyle on children. And where I won't be pigeonholed as ultra conservative is, one of the things that I'm running on is giving socialized healthcare, which is actually something that virtually every developed nation has. I want to extend maternity leave to beyond 6 months, 12 months. I actually want to extend that to 18 years. We want to be actively reinforcing, restoring the traditional family. But going back to what you said, I do think 60 to 70% of Americans actually do agree with the, hey, let's keep some of this social infrastructure in place. And the big compromise is let's step away from the children with this early sexualization. And I think actually 80 to 90% of the American people, if they're allowed to hear that type of a message, I think that resonates with them, because we have been intimidated into thinking that we can't talk about this. But when you talk to people on an interpersonal level, virtually everyone, except for, lesbian academics from Harvard University, understand that this does not belong around children. And a lot of people that were very much in favor of same-sex marriage 10, 15 years ago, they are now seeing this slippery slope argument that social conservatives were warning about at the time. They are seeing that come to fruition. And we're understanding that, by redefining, millennial old institutions and redefining them in a completely arbitrary manner, we have now, in a legal way, we have actually created a situation where we have a difficult situation in terms of protecting children. Now, how do we legally do that from these types of things? So one thing that I'm very big on is, we need a new law. We need a new amendment that makes it very clear that the LGBT community agenda, that stuff cannot be marketed to anybody under the age of 18. We need to reset that boundary around our children. And anything else to me really is secondary to that. So I'm willing to talk about taxes, and these are mathematical problems. This to me is not a thing to get held into one particular mindset, because these are mathematical equations that are going to fluctuate in accordance with the productiveness of the citizens and the economy and various different factors. So where republicanism in the past says, no, we don't want to talk about healthcare, we don't want to talk about taxes, this is what we're going to hold on to, all this other stuff. No, the children are not fair game. The children are off limits. Everything else we're happy to discuss. So it's a little bit of a reorientation of the Republican Party. And I think that it puts the Democrats in a very tough position where they're going to have to turn to their base and say, hey, we've got a president of the United States that's willing to play ball on health care, on minimum wage, on paid maternity leave, all of these topics that our blue collar working class base has been asking for 30 or 40 years. And he's simply saying, all that I want in exchange for that is back away from the children with the LBGT stuff. And I think that's an 80 to 90% support issue. And that's really how you change the dynamics in the country. That's actually how you break the mold, because we have this stagnation and this gridlock, and the Republican Party is playing this boy band conservatism of, hey, let's repackage this with, a young girl, or let's find a homosexual to speak about these things. No, the way that you actually break the mold is not by just, playing to the lower nature of the electorate and feeding platitudes to different people. It's to introduce new ideas and introduce new dynamics. And that's how you create a sort of friction and situation where new ideas are able to flourish, and we're actually able to see progress as a nation and move past this really ugly gridlock, which I think is bogging down and frustrating just about everybody at this point.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to issues of sexuality and teaching sexuality, that's an issue that should be left to the family. It has no place in school, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual. Let's leave that to the folks at home to teach. Let's focus on math and science and engineering and literature. And, instead of trying to warp young brains with sexuality taught in school. I remember my kids said to me when they were in high school and learning, in their health class about sexuality, they said, Dad, the worst thing about it is all they teach you about is disease. That, all of this stuff, perhaps it's a necessary talk you have to have with your children, but I should have it, you should have it, moms and dads out there should have it. But Mrs. Jones at PS 142 should be talking about mathematics and not sexuality.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with you, and I'll even challenge you a little bit further on that, because I think that even that dynamic is a little bit problematic, because what happens is we introduce all of these topics, and then it becomes, hey, well, actually, the government shouldn't have anything to do with marriage or this or that. And actually, no, society does have a role of reinforcing the family unit. Okay, this is not a multiple choice question. And that's really what happens is we get so fatigued with all of these things. And then it becomes, well, you teach it, but now we have a conversation now that has been forced on us. And I think as a nation, we have to actually embrace that conversation. And I think that we have to actually come to some real conclusions, because I don't think that when you're talking about the sexual development of children, I don't think that this is an arbitrary topic where, one set of values is okay here and one there. We kind of, as a society, we have to say, look, which is it? And we have a community that's now telling us that gender does not exist as a biological reality. It is something that the individual chooses. And they are challenging that. And, that challenge now, it's not correct both ways. Either everybody that has been gendering our children in accordance with biological reality for thousands of years, we've either all been guilty of sexually abusing our children, or this new approach is abuse of children. And to me, very clearly, when you talk about perverting the sexual development of children, it is sexual abuse of minors. And that to me is a very black and white issue. And, I will, that's the hill that I will die on, defending our children from that. So let's have that conversation and let's sort it out. instead of retreating back into, hey, just stop pushing it on us. You tell your children, we tell our children. Well, the reality is that homosexuality does not lead to children. So any child that is in a same-sex household is already fundamentally in an environment that would not exist on its own in nature. So they do not actually have an equivalent model to stand up against the biological reality of life. And this is, in fact, the thing is, no, it's not throw all this out and now we can't say this or that. No, it's this that has worked and this that is life, the only equation for life. This is the only thing that is allowed in the public forum. Everything else, you do that on your own, and you better be over the age of 18 before you're teaching it to somebody else.
Part of your campaign is this theme, Make America Christian Again. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I do think that the nation, in order to move past this really confusing time that we're in and this moral ambiguity, we have to get back to something that works. And, I'm partial to Christianity. It's a very big part of my life. But from a pragmatic perspective, it's very much plug and play because Western civilization, this is essentially what it is built upon. It's built upon the sort of Greco-Roman legal system and the Judeo-Christian values, the Christian faith. So we went through this phase of saying, hey, can we continue this system and take the religion out and move on without it? We've sort of seen that play out. We have the separation of church and state, which I think has played out in a very different way than the founding fathers probably envisioned. But with the past generation, the boomers, they really wanted to actually just, hey, let's pull this stuff away altogether. Let's remove Bible study. So a big part of it, make America Christian again. Again is a key word there because, in fact, we were a Christian nation until about 50 years ago. And you can see very clearly all of the negative trends in place in the country all went directly coincided with when we started pushing that stuff out. So the boomer generation wanted to try to organize a society without the religious tradition, without the Christian values, and wanted to intellectualize it and thinking that, we don't need to specifically have it as Christian. But now you're seeing how that experiment has played out. And it has not played out well. So the simple and correct thing to do is simply to return back to what we were before we went down this march towards oblivion that we're currently headed on. So, and I think that a lot of the issues and a lot of the things that we're going to need to do politically, the best and simplest way to orient the nation around that is just, hey, back to Christianity, because that's something that you want to talk about a majority coalition. We now have a very diverse country. The demographics are radically different than they were even 20 or 30 years ago. One thing that still unites this country is 70+% of the nation identifies as Christian. And I think that if we come together around that and we sort of recognize what clearly is basic Christianity that we can all agree upon, we can all come to our different interpretations of the book of Revelation or this or that. But basic Christian principles, that's something that Catholics, Protestants, we should all be able to come together upon and recognize that, hey, if you're not with this, you're on something different. And to me, this is really the main switch that has occurred, is that the political system in the United States historically has been a more white collar Republican Party versus a more blue collar Democrat Party. And I think now it's really moved to an almost Luciferian moral compass versus a Christian one. And I think that the strength of the Republican Party is that we are inherently on the Christian side. And I think the sooner that we recognize that, actually grab hold of that firm rock and use that as our way to, lead our way into the future and into the elections, that works directly to our strength. And I think that it's both the correct thing to do, and I think also the most pragmatic one as well.
I think it's an interesting point you make. I think it's hard to argue with the 10 Commandments. I think it's hard to argue with the Beatitudes. I think those are wonderful principles that everyone, or just about everyone, would say we should follow. Tell me, do you think if we became more of a Christian country again, school shootings, opioid addictions, sex trafficking, some of the ills that we see in our nation might be addressed and might be prevented?
Oh, I think you'd see a dramatic improvement. And, I also, although you didn't specifically ask, a natural question becomes, aren't you worried about alienating other groups, Islamic community, Judah? The reality is that really all religion is grappling with the issue of sin. And when you look at specifically the Abrahamic religions, we all basically follow that same moral compass. And we reach a different conclusion about, what the best way to deal with sin is. And a Christian nation is really an Islamic society is almost like a society that's living under Old Testament law. Yeah. So it doesn't actually diametrically oppose them. It doesn't exclude them. And in fact, I would argue that they would be much more receptive to a Republican Party that says, actually, in the name of Christ, we don't allow homosexuality to be taught to children in the public schools, on the televisions, on anything. I'm comfortable that the Islamic community is much more likely to align with us than they are with the Democrat Party, which is in fact going to be saying, no, this is a human right to push this on children. So I don't think that it really excludes anybody. And from a societal perspective, the nation drew people in Western civilization because of the interpretation of that Old Testament law. It is the most compassionate because we do have the function of grace built upon that. So yeah, certainly putting a moral compass back in place is going to address really all of these issues. And what we have seen now is what happens when we remove that. And the left has been very good about dissecting our social norms or social taboos. But I think everybody at this point sees their failure to replace these with an underpinning set of morals and values that is coherent, let alone functional. So I think that it'll be dramatic improvement across the board on all of those issues. And where I'm going to offend some conservatives is they're hung up on freedom of speech, and people like Charlie Kirk will look, if you want to defend pornography as freedom of speech, be my guest. Okay, this is nonsense. It's filth. And I think it's time to get rid of things that are not bringing anything good to society. And if that makes me not the top freedom of speech candidate, not the first, Second Amendment candidate, so be it. But I have a more holistic vision of what is needed to fix this country. And we actually need, instead of a retraction of authority, what we need is a more actually caring paternal form of it from the Republican Party.
The Republican Party has changed drastically over the years. I think the Democratic Party has changed drastically over the years. And I think a whole bunch of people have been left out in the cold by both parties. We think about blue-collar Democrats. Well, they're also blue-collar Republicans, and they are joined together by the same values: hard work, family, and faith.
That's right. Faith, free enterprise, the family, that is the underpinning core of this nation. That is, in fact, what made us great. And we have to find that coalition and make that coalition. And both sides are going to have to let go of some sacred cows. And, for the Republicans, they're going to have to get away from this no health care, no help to the working class on the wages. They're going to have to shake that. And I'm going to have to get the Democrats to take their hand off of the promoting homosexuality to children. And I think when we do that, we're going to have a very powerful new coalition that's going to be a very diverse coalition of Americans that's ready to abandon the failures of both sides. And really, this political system, it is collapsing. The old order is collapsing, and something new is going to come out of it. We're not going to have Clinton versus Bob Dole again. We are one or two elections away from having entertainers and social media stars and various different people stepping forward and leveraging their followings and their ability to influence people with large sums of money, Zuckerberg, these types. So I think we need to embrace the fact that it's time for something new. And where conservatism is hung up on that word conserving, we have to recognize that everything that conservatism has sought to conserve is effectively gone. There really is not anything left to conserve. So the party needs to reorganize into perhaps a more progressive mindset in terms of, no, we're actually going to take things. We're going to take things and we're going to now build something new and different. And I think that's the way to lead the country forward.
Let's talk a little bit about your political opponents. Let's start with the polar opposite. Let's talk about Mr. Secular himself. It's funny because he calls himself Catholic, but I don't see much Catholic in Joe Biden. I also don't see much of a leader in Joe Biden or much of a man in Joe Biden. I can't really believe that Joe Biden is running this country. It has to be some kind of entrenched bureaucracy that is leading us at this point. What are your thoughts on Joe Biden? Do you think he's the president of the United States other than just in title?
Well, I think he is. I think he is the president of the United States. And I think that that's very embarrassing. And I think that, as you've spoken to, there's a lack of just about everything that we would look to in terms of leadership. So a lot of people on the right are looking to the Great Reset and, what's ahead. And I don't so much see it that way. I think that we're past that point. I think that we now are at the point where the leftist authority has sort of played itself out. And now we're seeing what that looks like. And it's a complete mess. It's a complete disaster. So Joe Biden is clearly a disaster. And I don't think that anybody, far from, your most hardcore partisans, even his own party, I think everybody knows that we have a very weak leader. And we're seeing that also geopolitically as well. So I don't have too much to add to him. I think that the record speaks for itself. It's been a disaster. On a scale of 1 to 10, he's a 0. And so we do have a very vulnerable president. And I think that as Republicans, we have a very good opportunity to reclaim the White House in 2024. And I think it's important that we take this opportunity to actually enact some bold platform changes rather than continuing with what we've been doing, which has been more of a status quo, traditional brand of republicanism. Even Trump, which I'm sure we'll get to, a lot of bluster and rhetoric with Trump. But from a practical perspective, policy-wise, he's not too much different than what we've been getting from Republicans prior to him.
And that was my next question. What do you make of Donald Trump? He was conservative on some levels. He was liberal on other levels. He did begin giving out these paychecks to people for no work during the pandemic. Perhaps they were needed, perhaps they weren't, perhaps they helped cause this inflation mess that we're in right now. But he is a street fighter. He is a brawler. And he is more than a counterpuncher.
That makes two of us. Yeah,
What's
that makes two. I said that makes two of us. So I'm ready to get in the mud with him and go wherever this needs to go. And certainly, yes, I was supportive of him as president. He did accomplish some good. I'm very pleased with the Supreme Court justices that he appointed. But at this point, I think that continuing along with him has frankly become a bit toxic. And I think that the results of the election for him and insisting that it was stolen, I think it's a bit of a paradox, because if in fact that were the case, it speaks to a failure on his behalf, because it means that as sitting as the president, a massive terrorist attack occurred under his watch. So I don't think that plays very well for him to continue along with that. And I think that he's in some legal hot water right now. And clearly, I think that we can say that this administration has weaponized the DOJ, but this is nothing new. It's a continuation in an escalating process. But the left has been very willing to weaponize aspects of the government and aspects of the culture. They've been doing this for several decades. Trump really brought some of this upon himself. I think two things can be true at once. I think that with the specialized nature of the role of president and the laws in this country the way that they are, it would not surprise me if essentially any prior president could be indicted over some sort of a technicality or a failure to cross some T or dot some I. So I don't necessarily find it hard to believe that he may have in fact made some clerical errors, he and his team, that have very serious legal repercussions. And I also think it's true that this administration can be targeting him with the DOJ. So the issue is that he did escalate the rhetoric prior to post the election by maintaining that the results were illegitimate. When the president of the United States addresses the American people on election night and says the election is being stolen, that's a very serious charge. And the president of the United States has the authority to say that. So I took that very seriously. But that assertion was not backed with the type of action that something like that would demand. And the way that they approached it was from a legal perspective. And we know that the cases went nowhere for whatever reason. But nobody on the Supreme Court, including the 3 people that he appointed, were willing to give daylight on it. The reality is that provision, that measure, lost. And his tweeting at best was wildly negligent and irresponsible. So I don't think that what he did by continuing with this blustering hot rhetoric after the election, I don't think that was very good. And I think that it put his supporters, those that supported him most closely, in a very bad situation, because they were brought out to essentially be posterized by the mainstream media. So what he did and that event and what happened, were there agitators from the left? Yes, probably so. Probably so. We know the type of involvement that they have with these things, but he's made it too easy for them. And there is a coherence to what the administration is doing, where now, yes, we've never had somebody post a president be have their residency rated, but we really haven't had a president in recent memory, certainly, maintaining that the election was stolen from him. So when you're going in that direction, it sort of precipitates an escalation. And now this is very problematic, because those that follow him and support him most closely, they no longer have faith in the electoral system. So, their mindset, they're in this Trump-based reality where everything begins and ends with Trump. And look, that's just not the case. This struggle has existed long before Trump, and really it has to actually move past him at this point, because if you buy into that, and I get this a lot when I talk to Trump supporters, which is, well, how are you going to win if they stole the election from Donald Trump? Well, if the elections are no longer valid, then the only options left to his supporters is, in fact, counter-revolutionary behavior, which plays directly into what this current administration is wanting to do, which is to label the right as far right, as fringe, as even domestic terrorists. So it puts people in this cycle of, we can't win, they're taking it away from us. Pump the brakes. Let's actually put a platform on the ballot that actually does radically transform the country. Because I start with that, which is, did he receive a lot of obstruction when he was president? Yes, he certainly did. But if he got everything that he asked for, would it have fixed the country? And I would suggest to you that no, that maybe he dialed the Republican Party up from a 1 to a 10, but in actuality, we need to dial up our aggressiveness from maybe a 1 to 100. So Trump at this point, and going down with him, now we've got a dividing line. And to me, the dividing line is not having strong conservative principles and bold ideas. The dividing line is actually, hey, are you going along with Trump and continuing down this rabbit hole with him? Or are you going to break free from this and say, look, I don't have time to read every blog on the web. The reality is, I know who's sitting in the White House right now. It's not Donald Trump. He's not sitting in some underground base waiting to be, reinstated rather. So this is the reality. And, before we go into this counter-revolutionary mode, which I don't want anybody to get involved in, let's actually try putting a platform before the American people that would actually fix the country and get us on a new trajectory for a new American future. So most people in the Republican Party, what we're hearing is Trump is the presumptive nominee if he wants it. So let's wait and see. I'm not waiting and seeing, because he was there for 4 years and I didn't see enough from him to feel confident enough that him going back would even fix the problem. So until the Republican Party puts that platform forward, I'm going to step forward and I will gladly take the fight to Donald Trump. And in fact, one of the things that I plan on doing as we roll out this campaign is challenging him publicly to a debate. I'll be happy to donate to various charities to make that happen. Of course, we don't expect that to happen anytime soon, but we're going to take the fight to him because he didn't get the job done. And sending him back, how on earth are we going to send a guy back when the election was stolen, quote unquote, from under him as he was sitting in the White House? What are the chances that he's going to be able to reclaim it when he's not even sitting there this time? So there's a real paradox with the election being stolen of, it's a vicious cycle, and it's a cycle that ends in failure.
I see your point for sure. Daryl, you've thought through these issues. You're very articulate. You express yourself well. I can see you're going to be a formidable candidate. Final question to you. What are you doing now? What do you plan to do in the near future and the long-term future to make this goal a reality?
Well, from a procedural perspective, we're going to wait until after the midterm elections to do the formal filing and launching of the campaign. So I'm going to be devoting the next few months to doing media with truly bipartisan individuals such as yourself. We're not wanting to go, really both sides as an echo chamber, the Fox News, the MSNBC, the CNN. I think the American people are getting tired of that. So I want to speak directly to them with journalists such as yourself that do your job correctly and allow the candidates to speak for themselves. So that's going to be my focal point, getting this message out and connecting with the American people.
Wonderful. Daryl Constantine, delightful having you on Spotlight today. We appreciate you sharing your views and your vision for a better America. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. Real pleasure. You have a lovely afternoon. God bless you.
Same to you, sir. God bless. And I'm Logan Crawford. To the viewers at home, thanks for watching. Until next time on Spotlight.